since this is not my computer. Awesome, thank you. All right. So this is Morgan Coyle, if y'all have not met before. And Shantae is, well, there you are in the back, Shantae Mathis back there, and so we appreciate them coming over here and talking to us today. And I'll let you go ahead and take on this however you want to, if you want to know who's here, or just jump in or do other introductions with Gabe and.
Yeah, actually, I would love some introductions, like your name, your department, whether or not you've experienced with IRB. If you guys don't mind. I guess we can start over here.
That's me. Ben Russell. I'm in rehabilitation sciences. My area is audiology, so there's like a lot of hearing related stuff.
My name is Wendy Olson. I'm in rehabilitation science. My research interests are respiratory physiology.
And she's new, so she has no IRB.
Well, I have IRB experience, just not app state,
Right.
so I'm nervous. Scared.
Stefan Frisch, I'm also in rehabilitation sciences. I do speech production research, and I don't have any IRB experience since COVID. It's been a bit.
I'm Sam Dubois, new faculty in exercise science. My area of interest is physical activity and cognition. And I'm also new to the IRB process at AFSC.
I'm Matt Rogaski, public health and exercise science, and my research has to do typically looking for stuff in the blood, and I do have experience with IRB at App State.
I'm Liam Brady. I'm an undergrad exercise science major here in the honors program. I'm doing research with Dr. Rogatsky, and I have no IRB experience.
Bob Kowalski, exercise science, faculty, cardiometabolic health, physical activity, and sedentary behavior, and I have a little bit of experience with State IRB now at this point.
My name is Byron Hollowell, grad student here in exercise science, and I'm Dr. Rogatsky's graduate assistant, assisting him in some of the research he's got going on.
Hi, I'm Kelly Williams. I'm in the social work department, and I do have some experience with the IRB at Appalachian State and elsewhere.
I'm Carolyn Gilmore, new faculty in communication sciences and disorders. I have a little bit of IRB experience at Florida State, but not here.
Hi, my name is Shohui Wu. We have emailed before. And I'm from the Department of Public Health and Exercise Science, and I have experience for IRB process, but I would like to learn more in App State.
I'm Adrienne Meow. I'm new to App State in occupational therapy, and so new to App State IRB. Typically, I do research with children and children with disabilities.
Mark Trahan, I'm chair of the social work department, and it's my second year at App State, so I have experience with IRB in general, but not here at App State. And so we're working on a project together, and so I thought it would be a good idea for me to learn the do's and don'ts so that I can navigate this.
My name is AJ Britton. I'm a first year MSW student. I'm a GA for Dr. Trahan, and I'm excited to get to learn what to do and what not to do.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm hoping that while I'll present to you in this, that we can also have a conversation. I have several discussion questions. I want to hear from those of you who don't have experience, like what you feel most intimidated about or what you want to know about. And for those of you who do have experience, I want to hear about the challenges you've had, so that maybe we can figure out how to address them and have a better process for you going forward. So I'm Morgan Coyle, the IRB coordinator in research protections. And I have been here 6 years, 2.5 years in my current position. And I guess I will, this is how I move the slide. No, it's not.
Should be. Is the forward thing?
It's not working. Here, let me
Give it a
try.
second.
Oh, there we go. The mouse works. My agenda for this presentation is, I'm going to start out with an overview of a really general overview of the application process. Then I'll list some factors that slow down approval time. I'll provide some tips for reducing delays in approval time. I will provide a case study for why certain exempt studies sometimes take longer to review than you may be expecting, and what we can do to make the review process quicker for those kinds of studies. And then I will end with some responsibilities, like the responsibilities of PIs following approval and exemption. And mixed in throughout that, I will have several discussion questions where I'll ask for your input and your experiences.
Sharing y'all cell numbers and your home addresses, right?
And feel free to jump in at any time if you have a question about any of my slides. Okay, so the overview of the application process. Once you know what kind of research you want to conduct and have a plan for how you want to conduct the research, what does the process of applying for approval or exemption look like? So first of all, if you and your collaborators have not yet completed city training, or if you need to renew city training, then that's the best place to start. The city program Human Subjects Research course provides a strong foundation in the ethical principles that govern human subjects research and explains how they're applied in the regulations and the review process. That means that if you go through the city training course while you're keeping your research plan in mind, then some of the points that are brought up in the city training course will help you refine your research and identify concerns that the IRB might have when reviewing it so that you can proactively address it before you submit. That's why I always encourage people to start with city training if they haven't done it before. Additionally, as I'll mention later on, we can't issue approval or exemption until all personnel on the application have current city certification. So once you've finished the city training course, you'll want to check out our website and see what kind of resources on there would be helpful for you to use. In particular, I want to point out the consent corner, the student corner, and the faculty advisor guidance page. So the consent corner offers consent templates for both exempt and non-exempt research, as well as guidance for writing in plain language. I'll explain more about what's offered on the consent corner later on in the presentation, but it's a really good resource to use. And then for student-led research or research that that students are heavily assisting with, the student corner is where I refer all student researchers to. It answers the common questions that we see from student researchers. And then on the other hand, we have the faculty advisor guidance page, and that is for the faculty that will be assisting the student in their research. So the faculty advisor guidance page goes into detail about areas where students need the most assistance and how to assist them in building their IRB application. I'll explain a little bit more about some considerations we have for student research specifically later in the presentation. Once you've reviewed our resources, it's time to start your application. We have a guidance document that walks you through step-by-step how to use Cayuse. Because Cayuse is, for anyone who has used it, will know it is not the most intuitive platform. It is difficult to navigate, and it's sometimes difficult to tell whether or not you've submitted successfully. So we've created guidance documents that have pictures and instructions saying, click here, do this, make sure it looks like this, to help you navigate the nuances of the system. Those guidance documents can be found on the Cayuse guidance tab of our website. And when you receive the slides for this presentation, you can directly click on this link here, which will take you to one of the guidance documents, the guidance document for the initial application specifically. Then once you've submitted your application and it's under review, you'll be expected to respond for requests for clarifications and changes. And keep in mind, multiple rounds of revision may be required. In a lot of our reviews, we use a two-part review process where we start with a technical review where IRB office staff, which is me and Willow, will go through the application, identify inconsistencies, missing areas, things that need clarification before we send it on to an IRB reviewer for actual review. And so when you get initial comments, as part of the technical review process, we're trying to help gather the information that the IRB needs to review the application. Once we have that information, we send it on to the IRB reviewers for review, and they'll provide feedback, like questions and clarifications and needed changes for the specific procedures that they have expertise in. So it's important to be aware that the process isn't just you send it in and then you get approval. It's a back and forth. You send it in, we send it back to get clarifications, you send it in, we might send it back again. And then eventually, once everything is all straightened out, we'll issue the approval or exemption determination letter. And so that brings us to step 5. You need to wait for official approval or exemption before beginning recruitment procedures. As per our policy, our guidance, and the federal regulations, you cannot involve human subjects in research procedures without approval or exemption. Okay. Factors slowing down approval. A big one is city training is not complete. Even if your application is perfect, ready to go, everything is approvable, if there is a single person on your application that has not completed city training, we are unable, per our policy, to issue approval or exemption for an initial application. That's why it's important to make sure that everyone on your study has city training so that you don't experience this delay. Additionally, one of the biggest issues that we see in submissions that can really prolong the review process are inconsistencies, missing materials, incomplete descriptions, or things like that. When the application is inconsistent or missing materials, we don't know what you're doing. If you say you're doing one thing here and then your consent form says something different, we don't know what we're reviewing, and we can't approve what research that we don't understand. So it's essential that the application is complete, that it's internally consistent, and that everything is described in a clear, coherent manner. This will make the review process a lot easier on us, and it will shorten the time that it takes to get approval. Additionally, a common issue we see, and this is due to an issue with Cayuse, is Cayuse allows people to upload links. We can't accept links for documents. The reason is because the IRB record, the protocol in the system, once it's approved, represents like what was reviewed. If you upload a link, then you could change it later or delete it, and we wouldn't have a record of what the initial document was. This is why we require a Word doc or a PDF or some other permanent file be uploaded. And this catches a lot of people off guard because Cayuse says you can upload a link here, and people will be like, oh, okay, I'll just upload a link to my survey, which is a logical conclusion, but then we'll have to send it back, even if that's the only comment that we have, and say, hey, you need to upload this as a PDF. So being aware of that upfront will help you avoid having that issue. Yes?
For some surveys, if they are in the electronic form, so if the participants need complete the questionnaire, and they can, they can see the exactly contents for the questionnaire. But when we submit the IRB application, we may not have, there is a link, and we may not have the full contents for it. Yeah. How about that?
So when you have all of your stuff in Qualtrics and you don't have a corresponding like Word or PDF document, an option, I've seen some people take screenshots of their Qualtrics survey and upload that. That's an option. I don't know if Qualtrics allows you to export the file as a Word file or a PDF. If it does, then that's an option. Google Forms, I believe you can like print to PDF. But we need some sort of permanent file other than the link, even though the participants will be taking it through that link. Does that make sense?
For that, it's not from Qualtrics or like Red Hat. It's from like Nage. It's a Nage platform. And
okay.
The participants can go to that website and complete the questionnaire. But for the PIs, we don't. We can complete like an example one, but maybe different from the participants, because every participant have different answers. If the answer is different, so the question will also be a little bit different.
Okay, that makes sense. So You're asking about using established questionnaires that are developed by someone else that exist like in that case, we might be able to accept a link. Yeah, in those cases, they don't come through our office very often where people use those kinds of things, but we do see them occasionally. And if you put a link and then you describe in the procedures why you used the link rather than the PDF saying, hey, this exists on this platform. I don't own this survey. I am using what is available through, say, like the NIH website or something like that, then that is something that I think we can accept. Thank you for that question. Okay. Another issue we see that can slow down approval time is unsuccessful submission, when you think you've submitted, but we didn't get it. And this is an issue we see a lot, and it's a really unfortunate issue because you think you submitted, we think we're waiting on you. Neither of us know that there are steps that need to be taken. So this can happen when you forget to certify an application or you don't realize that Cayuse requires certification. For those of you who've never submitted in Cayuse, when you submit your first application in Cayuse, you'll see that the submission process it's not really very user-friendly. Cayuse requires you to complete the submission, and then it requires you on a completely separate page to then certify the submission. This is not intuitive at all, which is why let me see if I can go back. I can't figure out how to go back. Oh, wait. Oh, it's working now. Okay. This is why I have this instruction guidance document. Let me see if I can pull it up. So when you submit, you'll click complete submission. It then navigates you to this page where you then have to click certify. We don't receive it unless it's been certified. And since it's not intuitive, I created this guidance document so that you can step-by-step go through the process, see, okay, I completed submission. And then you'll see I put in capital letters, do not exit. Because most people complete submission and they think, okay, it's under review, which is a really logical thing to think. But the way Cayuse is designed, we haven't received it yet. And so you have to certify it. I'll show you, I have some slides that show you how to do that, that are, I think, directly after this slide. Another issue we see with unsuccessful submission is we send back stipulations. People change what we ask them to change, provide clarification where we ask for clarification, they resolve the stipulations, and then they think they're good to go. We don't know that you've completed your revisions until you've resubmitted. So the review will not continue until you complete the process of addressing the stipulations, clicking complete submission, and then clicking certify and making sure that it's resubmitted. The process for resubmitting response to stipulations looks pretty similar to the process of initial submission, but we can't continue the review until we've received the revised application. Other issues that we see are with the data security protections and consent process are two of the biggest areas where we send back the most comments. I have slides later on that describe what you can do to address each of these. And so I'll go over those in more detail a little later on. And then finally, when comments are not fully addressed during resubmission, the review process takes longer. If we send you back comments, we need you to address those comments in some way. Sometimes we get back applications where half of the comments were addressed and the other half were ignored. We have no choice in that situation but to send it back with the same comments that weren't addressed, and this prolongs the review process for everyone. So when we send back comments, if you have any questions about the comments we send back, or if you think we misunderstood something about your study, reach out to us. We're always happy to discuss the comments we sent back and help you understand what we're asking for. And if we misunderstood your study and are asking for something that doesn't make sense for your study, then that's something that's important for us to know and is a conversation that's better had over email or in a meeting rather than through the Cayuse system. Okay, so as promised, I have 2 slides on how to certify your submission. So when you complete your submission or when a student or a research coordinator completes a submission on your behalf, you will receive this email. initial submission requires your certification. What you need to do when you get that email is go into the Cayuse Human Ethics product, look for the My Tasks tab, which is in, I think it's in like the middle of the screen. And you'll see the study number for the study that you need to certify, and it'll say view submission and certify submission. If someone other than you completed it, then you'll want to view the submission, which you can do by clicking on the button, clicking view, and then going through the application. If anything needs to be changed, you can send it back to yourself by clicking return. But you want to make sure if your name is on it as PI, you want to make sure that you're 100% okay with what is in that application before you submit. If you're the one that submitted it, or if you have already reviewed it and it's ready to go, what you do is you go to, once you click on this link here, it'll take you to the submission information page, which is where in the top right hand corner of the page, you'll see an area that says routing, and there's the option to return and certify. Return is what sends it back to you for further editing. Certify is what sends it to us. And you can check whether or not you've successfully submitted by looking at the banner at the top of the screen. And this is also illustrated in the guidance document that I pulled up earlier. So if we've received the submission, it will look like this. It will be under pre-review or under review. And if it is if it lists itself as being in draft or awaiting authorization, that means that we have not received it. And so the banner is kind of like a cheat sheet for telling you like what needs to be done for the study. If it is in draft or awaiting authorization, then there's something you need to do on your end. But if it's under pre-review or under review, that means it's with us and there's something we need to do on our end. And if you ever have any questions about if you're not sure if you submitted or aren't sure how to interpret the banner, the information on the submission details page, you can always email me and say, did you get my application? And I'd be happy to check on it for you. Okay. As promised, the informed consent process. So this is one of the biggest, one of the areas where we send back perhaps the most, yes.
Since I'm new, I have a quick question about information security. You mentioned that as a donor concern. It's pushed back. You may cover this later. Is there somebody doing information security plans for projects at the university that will give us a plan for how we're going to keep it?
If you want to know how to store your data securely, reach out to ITS, Office of Information Security. They're wonderful to work with, and they'll help you understand what App State requires in terms of data security protections. And you can say in your application, I'm following a plan provided to me by ITS, or I've consulted with ITS in developing my plan. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay. Informed consent. Since this is one of the areas that we send back the most stipulations across all studies, I wanted to dive into this in a little bit more detail. So we pay a lot of attention to the consent process because it's one of the most essential ways of protecting participants' rights and ensuring that their participation in the research is voluntary and fully informed. That's why it's so important that the consent materials are presented in a way that facilitates comprehension, such as writing at a low reading level using clear, concise wording and easy to understand visual presentation. This can be, depending on the kind of research you conduct, it can be difficult to figure out how to describe your research procedures in language that a layperson would understand. This is why we have some guidance on our website to help with that. In our consent corner, if you scroll to the bottom in the consent guidance section, we have plain language references. And so you can click on that and it will bring up a list of, I want to say 10 different plain language dictionaries. And so what plain language dictionaries are is you put in a complex word, like you put in jargon and then it says, it gives you options for saying that in a way that a regular person would understand. So like you could put in like, vasovagal syncope and the plain language will say fainting. And this can be a really helpful way to figure out how to describe your consent your procedures in your consent form in a way that someone that doesn't have your expertise will understand. Additional, oh, yes.
I was just gonna share, I found generative AI to be very helpful in doing that, some of that stuff, just to share like Copilot and ChatGPT. It seems to be very helpful to change language down. If you haven't been using it, try it.
Thank you. That's a great idea. I'll start suggesting that to people.
Yeah.
That would definitely be easier than trying to figure it out on your own.
Very, very quick.
Awesome. Thank you. In addition to writing in a way that a layperson would understand, it's also essential that your consent form clearly and accurately describes the research procedures, including all relevant risks. In order for consent to be fully informed and participation in all the procedures to be voluntary, people need to know what they're getting into, including all risks associated with it. And so we cannot approve a study that doesn't clearly describe the procedures and the risks in their consent form. Additionally, as I've mentioned, the consent process needs to emphasize voluntariness and minimize the risk of undue influence. A lot of research that I see at App State is recruitment is conducted through App State. And so that leaves the possibility that students in your class or people that you may have existing relationships with will volunteer to be in the research. It's important that if there is the possibility that this will occur, that your consent process accounts for this and describes the protections you'll put in place to make sure that they don't feel pressured to participate. Some options for this include having someone that is not an instructor of the student who's volunteering perform the consent process, or clearly stating in the consent process and in the consent form that your participation in the research will have no bearing or will have no effect on your relationship with any member of the research team or the university. And if we do note in your application that there is a chance that you will recruit people who you have power over in some shape or form, even if just in a perceived way, then we will require there be a plan in place to mitigate the risk that those people will feel pressured to participate. And finally, we have templates for exempt and non-exempt consent forms on the consent corner of our IRB website. They're a good starting place, and the non-exempt consent forms include all of the elements that we need that are required for non-exempt research to be approved. We are hoping to revamp our consent templates soon, make them a little bit more user-friendly and make some of the language we provide a little bit easier to read. We haven't done that yet, but we're hoping sometime this semester that we'll get some new consent forms up there. Yes.
Got one comment on that. I noticed in the consent form template right now that it's above the 8th grade. So
Yes.
if you could keep that in mind when you're revising the template.
We're aware. That's one of the biggest reasons that we want to revise it, because it's written in a way that doesn't make it easy for the researchers to write in the way that we require them to write. And we recognize that, and that is something that we are hoping to address very, very soon. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, secure file storage and sharing. As I mentioned earlier, ITS, Office of Information Security, is a really good resource for understanding ways that you can protect the confidentiality of your data. Additionally, if you don't want to reach out to them for a consultation, you can check out their secure file storage and sharing site. So it has this really nice little table that says all the different levels of data security and what approved storage methods are, approved sharing methods are, and where you can never store this kind of data. And so this is a nice little cheat sheet for proper data security. It's linked on this website, and you can also find it by searching secure file storage and sharing App State. So as the site shows, data storage on personal devices, personal cloud accounts, et cetera, are never permitted for sensitive or confidential data. You need to store your data on an App State server or computer if you want to protect the confidentiality of the data. Some really good options are uStore and RedCap. Google Drive is also an option for some research and can be more accessible, especially when students are conducting research who may not have access to uStore or RedCap. Additionally, if identifiable private information needs to be transferred between members of a research team, especially if the member is external to App State, file share is what ITS recommends that you use. Okay. Oh, yes, Shantae.
Just wanted to add that also just be aware as your study may rotate students or people who have different permissions on, if someone graduates or is no longer on the study, make sure that you do a sweep and remove access, whichever storage method that you want to do, because that is one of our, I'd say one of our top 5 reasons for non-compliances that get reported. In addition to what the main issue may be, when we go to look at who has access, that's one of the issues. So just make sure you do a sweep each semester, who's on here and who's not.
Based off of that, you're talking about the way where you're actually storing the information, but what about the actual application, the Cayuse? Should we go and remove that student who has graduated from the Cayuse application, or?
If you don't have any other modifications to submit, it's not essential to remove graduated students from the application. But when you do submit your next modification, like to add people or to change procedures, we do ask that you update the personnel list.
It's just more important that they don't have access.
Yeah, that they're not in your Google Drive folder that has all the research data, which we have seen before.
I have a second question to that. With the way some research is now on the promotion of providing in some type of public format your de-identified data.
Yes.
Do we need to specify that during this initial application process, or is it okay that it's de-identified that we can go ahead and share it in some type of open format?
Okay, so that de-identified data is that's a really good question. The answer is once data are de-identified, they're technically not human subjects data anymore if you can't connect it back to the people. However, the 2018 revision to the common rule, which governs IRB review of research, included a requirement that if there is any chance that you will share people's de-identified data publicly, that participants need to be made aware of that in their consent form.
So as long as that's in the consent document.
Yep. We also ask about it in the application. So you would need to disclose that to us ahead of time, but once the data are de-identified, there's no way to link it back to the subject. You are, as long as participants were informed that you'll share that, you are absolutely free to share that publicly.
And if we didn't put that in ahead of time and then down the road we want to share it, we're going to be restricted.
Yeah, because for non-exempt research, we require a statement that either says that you will, that there is the chance that you will share the data or that you will never share the data. And if you tell people you will never share the data outside the research team, then you can never share the data outside the research team because they didn't agree for their data to be shared. So I have a few discussion questions. Feel free, like any of you jump in on any of these. What else other than what I mentioned have you experienced delaying your approval? What issues have you run into when submitting or addressing when submitting your application or addressing stipulations? And what areas of the submission process do you find most frustrating and difficult to navigate? Yes.
This is more of a question, I guess.
Okay.
That I've into, so because I'm new, I don't know what I will experience. Which is why I'm scared. But my question is this, sometimes when I put forth an IRB, the risk of the assessment of the risk to the subjects, obviously want to minimize that and maximize any benefits that they may receive. But the evaluation or the merit of the research, like, isn't that for me to decide, right? And then like the risk is what the IRB does, correct?
So if the study is minimal risk, is no more than minimal risk, then yes, the merit of the research is for you to decide. But if subjects are put at a greater risk than an average person would experience in daily life, the regulations and the Belmont report, which are the ethical foundation of the regulations, require that we ensure that there is benefit to the research because we can't, as per the principle of beneficence, we can't put people at risk when there is no benefit or when the benefits don't outweigh the risks. Does that make sense?
So should like, I totally get what you're saying. So like, should I like, to kind of circumnavigate that issue, should I like try to, when I submit, should I try to also submit like research art, because like I'm navigating Cayuse now and I'm trying to figure out where I can submit additional like rationale for that, so it's not like intuitive.
Yeah. So I think trying to remember the layout of the Cayuse application off the top of my head, there's an area in the study procedures section.
Background.
Yes, background rationale, thank you.
Like to be able to.
You can cite your sources. You don't need to attach the articles. You can cite your sources, and if we need to follow up, like we can access the articles if needed. But if you provide in your background rationale, just the background for why this research is needed, what benefit you think it'll provide, and then here are the sources that say that whatever you're trying to support, that'll be sufficient. And then if it does require, if it's more than minimal risk and requires full board review, then we'll invite you to come to the meeting and you can additionally provide information to us at the meeting in conversation with the IRB. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is actually.
Are there any other questions or anyone that wants to give input on areas that they've had issues with in their application, things that they feel are frustrating or unreasonable, things that you feel like could be improved with our process? Yes.
My question, I just, under the recruitment IRBs, the in-person conversation and like having to generate some type of hypothetical script.
Yes.
Cause like that's such it just doesn't cover all the potentials for the, I just don't, like, what's the rationale for us needing to put that in there?
So that's a really good question. And you're right. This is something we've been discussing with the IRB chair about backing down on is we've previously required, and we haven't put this in place yet, but hopefully soon we'll put this in place where we put more trust in the PIs to be able to have conversations. We've previously required a recruitment script, but we are examining what it would look like for us to step back and not require a recruitment script or require just general points for recruitment. The reason that we've required a recruitment script in the past is to make sure in certain circumstances that the research is being represented in a fair way and that people aren't being placed under pressure to participate, because sometimes when we've seen recruitment scripts that pressure people to participate. And so that's why we continue to ask for them to make sure that that's not occurring. But we are hoping in the future to, minimize our requests for this, because we do recognize that it's not really reasonable to like have the researchers anticipate all the conversations they might have related to the research. And so that's, it's a very valid point.
One thing I find frustrating is just, I guess, keeping that internal consistency, like you mentioned, I find it sometimes difficult because questions seem to get, in my opinion, repetitive, and I keep seeming to have to say the same thing. But I've already gone away from that previous page. I've hit next. I don't remember exactly what I said before. For some reason, Cayuse just seems to take a little bit long to load each page. I guess it would be nice if it was just one big form. You could just keep scrolling down so I can check what I wrote above and that kind of thing.
A little help on that is if you open up 2 screens of Cayuse.
Okay.
And then you can have where you're answering, and then you can scroll back and forth to see or click from section to section, and then and you can copy and paste as needed. And that way you can have that consistency.
Okay.
Just having 2. And I know for me, I can just take a tab and drag it to the second screen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Andy, I didn't even notice you come in. Thank you for the input. For those of you who don't know, that's our IRB chair, Andy. He's the best. But with regard to there was a first part of your question, wasn't it? There was something I wanted to address and I lost it.
The repetitiveness? Maybe?
Yes. So we recently updated our form. I can't remember when you submitted an application last, but if you haven't submitted using the updated form, you might notice that some of the repetitive questions have gone away or been rephrased. And if the next time you submit an application, if you're like, oh, this is still repetitive, we're continually refining our forms. So please feel free to email us and say, why am I asked this 3 times? And then we'll keep that in mind the next time we do revisions. We always appreciate feedback on our form. There are certain things we can't change, but there are certain things we can, and we are happy to change what we can to make it easier for you. Yes.
I have a question. It might be a little bit more specific to me, but it links back to something we've talked about, and that was when you're uploading materials that your participants are going to work with or be exposed to, you need to have a physical hard copy of it. I do a lot of cognitive testing, and so some of them are paper forms, some of them are programs through places like the NIH, or ones that I developed based on normed stimuli, that have been validated. Would you want me to upload all 600 images of the everyday objects they're going to see, or would that be an instance where providing a link to the platform that houses the normed validated set of stimuli would probably be acceptable?
So in that case, we would probably ask for a combination of a link to that form and then a description. So if you upload, say, a Word doc saying, for this part of the study, like I will show people images of this, and this type of things. Here's a link to the full like archive of images, then that would be sufficient for our purposes.
It's kind of a general question. If I'm working with someone that is outside of the university that I'm contracting with, and they're helping with the research in the sense that they're moderating a focus group, for example. Does that person need to have the city training?
Yes.
Okay. They're not affiliated with the university at all, and but they're helping with the collect data, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
And that brings up a good point that I didn't address in this presentation, but I will address now, and that is collaborative research. And so there are 2 main forms of collaborative research. There is collaboration with people who work at another institution that also has an IRB, and there's collaboration with people who don't work at an institution that has an IRB. The processes for those are different. For when people... So when you're working with another university, you'll need to enter into, for the most part, unless it's exempt, a reliance agreement. And so you'll reach out when you know that you want to collaborate with another university. The best thing to do is reach out to us. Let us know as soon as you know this collaboration may occur, and then we'll work with you on getting the things in place that we need to get in place to enter into that reliance agreement. In the situation that you mentioned where you're having someone that is conducting research procedures with human subjects who isn't affiliated with an institution that has an IRB, they'll need to enter into what is called an individual investigator agreement. This is where they'll have to complete city, and then they will have to sign an agreement confirming that they'll follow all of the rules and regulations set forth by the government and by App State. And once they're trained in city and they've completed the individual investigator agreement and you've described what their role is in the research, there's a place in the application where you can list them. We'll file the individual investigator agreement with the application, and they'll be considered essentially App State personnel covered under our federal wide assurance.
Okay.
And
which comes first, the agreement and then the training?
Well, technically they can sign the agreement before they complete the training, but we cannot approve them. We cannot approve the application until they've completed the training, just like with App State personnel. And feel free to reach out to us with the specifics of this, and we can provide individualized guidance.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
You mentioned collaboration. We should communicate with you about collaborating with other institutions. It's international collaboration, and we have not submitted the IRB. Do we start communicating with you well in advance of the submission, or we communicate with you when we submit?
It's a good idea to reach out to us before you submit, because with international research, in addition to us figuring out whether or not a reliance agreement is possible, there are also export control concerns, which I don't handle, but someone else in my in the research protections unit handles. And so discussing all of that before you submit the application will help you know what to say in the application with regard to that collaboration. But if you, I mean, you can also, we will reach out to you if we see that there's an international collaboration in your application. But I always recommend that people reach out to us, the earlier the better, so that if there's any like kinks that we need to figure out, we have time to work those out. But it's really up to you when in the process you reach out to us. Then you have a question?
Yeah, so for the collaboration, the collaboration with the other university, if the human subjects will be recruited in Bonn, and the collaborator will only do some like analysis, will they need to like complete the all? Yeah.
That's a fantastic question, and a good point that I should have mentioned. If you are collaborating with someone, and their only role is analysis of de-identified data, they are not considered to be conducting human subjects research. Because as I mentioned in response to an earlier question, when data are fully de-identified and there's no way to link it back to the subject, they don't fall under the federal definition of human subjects anymore. And so you can share that data with your collaborator as long as it is fully de-identified, and they won't be contacting subjects in any way without them needing to, without us needing a reliance agreement and without them needing to be listed on the application. Additionally, if you are assisting someone at another university with analysis of their de-identified data, it's the same thing. If they're sending you de-identified data, you don't need to be listed on their IRB and you don't need approval through us.
And do we need their university's IRB or something like that? They also need to have their separate IRB, or we just have one IRB?
Are you asking about the situation where they're doing de-identified data analysis?
Yes. After we collect the data, we can send the de-identified data to them and they will do the analysis. But do they need their university's IRB?
If the data are de-identified, then they won't need any approval from their university's IRB to analyze the data, because once the data are fully de-identified, it's no longer considered human subjects data. And the IRBs do not have the authority to review things that don't involve human subjects. So thank you. Yes.
City training, if you have a researcher that is not affiliated with any IRB granted institution. I looked into this, I mean, it's been like 6-7 years, I don't know if it's the same, but they wanted to do city training and it was like $500 or something.
I've got a solution for you.
Do, okay.
So the great thing about App State is you can sign, so they'll sign up under whatever email they use, and then they can affiliate with App State on there. If they need help with this, or if you need help guiding them through that, reach out to me and I can show you exactly how to do that. But you don't actually need to use your App State email to sign up. And as a note, if you do sign up using another email, then Cayuse will not tell us that you're city certified, and we will require you to submit your certification to us. But you can sign up with any email as long as you affiliate with App State. And so the external investigator can affiliate with App State, and App State is essentially paying for it for them.
Thank you.
Yes, Shante?
And we have it on our general page. I can get them to move it to the IRB page, so there's a copy as well, but there's a copy on like basically how to affiliate with App State, and it goes through those instructions. I do that.
Yes.
So you do the process is you do a sort of technical review and then a heavier like content process review. The IRB that I had approved in the past took like multiple back and forth. Now I understand like the technical part, and you address those issues, and then the more process driven stuff. But it felt like that after the second time I made changes, but then it felt like a whole different person had a whole new set of problems. So will the expert reviewer, whoever they are, is that the same person every time? That's kind of what I came across. Like I had a different I addressed the concerns that the person had, and then I had a new person. It felt like who had different concerns than the first person.
That does sometimes occur. So the technical review will be conducted by office staff, and then when we send it on to an IRB reviewer, it is a different person. Occasionally, we will also run into situations where research requires expertise that the original reviewer doesn't have, and they'll bring someone else in, and that can be where that person who has the expertise that the original reviewer didn't have brings in concerns. And I know that that can be a frustrating process on the PI's end of things, and we are trying to figure out a way to minimize the differences that you see like throughout the review process. But yeah, since the applications are all reviewed by people, and when multiple people are involved, they'll see things differently. Sometimes we do run into those situations.
Sure. Right, thanks.
Anyone else have any more questions or comments before I move on? Okay, so moving into tips for reducing delays in IRB approval or exemption, the biggest one, and if you only take one thing away from this presentation, talk to us. If you have a problem, or if you have like an issue with the application with our process, reach out to us. We want to help you. We don't want to get in your way. We want to facilitate you conducting sound ethical research that is compliant with our policies and guidelines, and we are here to help you when you run into issues. Some of the ways that we offer help are pre-submission consultations. Before you even submit an application, feel free, especially if you're new to the process or if you're conducting research that you've never requested approval for before, reach out to us, meet with us, sit down with us, describe what you're planning to do, and we can identify some preliminary things that you need to think about when you're filling out your application. Additionally, if you know that there is a deadline associated with your project, say you need approval by a certain time because you're conducting research that is, say, associated with a program that's occurring outside the research, or you have a deadline based on a grant that you're applying for, let us know. We can't always guarantee that we can get you approval in time for the deadline, but if we know about the deadline, then we will do our best to help you meet that deadline. Additionally, if you don't receive a response after 10 business days, reach out to us. If you submit your application, you haven't heard back in 10 business days and you don't know like what's going on, reach out to us, because sometimes, as I mentioned on an earlier slide, sometimes people think they've submitted and they haven't. And we want to catch that like sooner than later. Sometimes people will email us 3 months later and say, hey, I haven't heard back about my IRB, and we'll look in the system and we'll say, we haven't received it. And I don't want that to ever happen to any of you. Additionally, sometimes reviews will take longer than 10 business days, especially with expedited or full board studies, but we can always give you a status update. So please feel free to reach out to us if you haven't heard from us within about 10 business days and just ask what's going on. You can also reach out to us when you submit your application to make sure that we received it if you're unsure of whether or not it was submitted successfully. And then also, if you run into any issues submitting, if you have questions about our required stipulations, or if there's anything else we can help with, talk to us. We can help you through the process. We are happy to sit down and have a meeting with you, and things can sometimes, when we send back a lot of stipulations or have a lot of concerns about a study, things can be resolved in a 15-minute meeting that would otherwise take hours through Cayuse. So reach out to us. We are here to help you. And we want to help you. And so reach out to us, let us know how we can help you. Additionally, submit your application early. We recommend 2 to 4 months before approval is needed. It won't always take this long, but it's better to submit early, get your approval early than to submit late and not get your approval on time. The earlier you can submit, the more likely it is that you'll get approval in the time frame that you need. Additionally, respond to our comments and concerns in a complete, respond to all of them and try to resubmit them within a reasonable time frame. The longer the study is sitting on your end, the longer the review process takes overall. Sometimes people will sit on their study for 2 months before sending it back to us and then get upset that it took 3 months to get approval from the initial submission. So if you can make it so that it's on our side more than on your side, your approval process will go faster. Okay. case study for exempt research, because I know a lot of people have had concerns about the exempt review process. And so I'm hoping this case study will illustrate why sometimes the review for exempt studies can take a lot longer than you might expect. So my case study is, imagine you've developed an intervention program designed to improve the well-being of older adults in your community. The intervention involves participation in yoga classes and attending several sessions on healthy meal planning. You wish to study the effectiveness of the intervention using survey and focus group procedures so that you can advocate for others to implement similar programs in their community. Should you apply for exemption? Does anyone have an opinion about that?
Gonna say no, because you have to, the focus groups, you're gonna be interacting with people.
Also implementing an intervention with older adults, right? Which might have written.
You're introducing any type of medical advice with dietary supplement without giving a full review of that person's medical history.
So those are all good points. And the answer was, this was a trick question. And the answer is, it depends. And so I'll address each of your points. So for the focus groups actually can be exempt under category 2, provided that if you are just doing focus group procedures and you're not asking any questions that could say put someone at legal risk, then those procedures, and they're with adults, then those procedures can be exempt in most circumstances. The answer to whether or not this study is a exempt research depends on whether or not the intervention is a research procedure. And the reason that I constructed this example is because we get a lot of applications like this, and we don't know whether or not it can be reviewed for exemption because we don't know whether or not the intervention is occurring within or independently from the research. And I'll explain that distinction so that it makes sense to you. And if you guys still don't understand the distinction at the end of this slide, let me know. So when figuring out whether or not the intervention is a research procedure, you want to ask yourself a few questions. Would the intervention occur if the research didn't occur? Is the intervention open to people who didn't agree to be in the research? And will everyone who completes the intervention be asked to provide data for the research, like complete surveys or be in the focus groups? So if the intervention will occur outside of the research context, meaning it would occur regardless of whether or not you were doing the research, it's open to people who didn't agree to be in the research, and the people who are participating in the intervention won't be required to do the surveys and focus groups, then the intervention is not considered a research procedure. Which means that the concerns that both of you brought up they're relevant to the people who are administering the intervention, but they're not relevant to the research because the research doesn't involve the intervention. So we won't be reviewing the intervention because the intervention is not considered a research procedure. However, if the participation in the intervention is contingent upon being in the research, if the intervention is only open to people who've consented to be in the research, who will be expected to complete surveys for research purposes or be in focus groups for research purposes or have other measures collected about them for research purposes, then the intervention is part of the research, and therefore the intervention needs to be reviewed as a research procedure, including all risks associated with the intervention. And so this intervention would not be exempt for the reasons that you both pointed out. And so the answer to whether or not this particular study is eligible for exemption depends on whether or not the intervention is the research procedure. And if we get an application that says, I'm doing research on this intervention, but it's not clear to us whether or not the intervention is part of the research, then before we can even review the application, we have to find out whether or not the intervention is part of the research, because the exempt review process and the expedited review process or the full board review process, they're different processes, and we can't start the process until we know whether or not the study is eligible for exemption. And so our first part of the review will be clarification. We'll ask some questions that try to get at whether or not the intervention is a research procedure, and that try to get you to clarify that in the application so that we can proceed with the actual review. Does anyone have any questions about like how to decide, how to determine whether or not an intervention is part of the research or external to the research? I know it's a complicated issue, and I'm hoping that this example helps illustrate it a little bit.
If the survey or the data collection does not involve in like identifiable information, we maybe classify that. Maybe can be exempted from.
If the intervention is not a research procedure and the data that you're collecting are non-identifiable, then you can apply for exemption. But if the intervention is part of the research, and even if you're not collecting identifiers on the survey, the intervention is still a research procedure, and we will still need to review it as non-exempt regardless of whether or not you're collecting identifiers. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So, yes, Gabe. Oh, I have a chat question. Thank you. Okay. Oh, that was. Thank you for attending the presentation. Okay. So why do studies like this take so long to approve or exempt? I'm hoping that as I explain what we have to think through in the review process, that you understand a little bit why it takes so long sometimes for us to issue an exemption determination for this research. It's because a lot of times the application is unclear about whether or not the intervention is a research procedure. And like I said, we can't determine the appropriate level of review until we know what is a research procedure and what isn't, because we only have the authority to review research procedures with human subjects. It doesn't fall within our purview to review interventions that aren't considered research procedures. And so we need to determine whether or not the intervention is a research procedure before we can proceed. Additionally, if the intervention is not a research procedure, the applications and materials need to clearly reflect this. For instance, we'll often require statements in the consent form that say something along the lines of, you are still, trying to think of the exact language, you are still allowed to participate in this intervention if you're not in the research. Like you are not required to be in this research to receive the intervention. Making it really clear to participants, both in the consent form, in the recruitment and the consent process, that their decision of whether or not to take your surveys has no impact on their ability to receive the intervention that you're studying. It needs to be clearly distinguished, clearly delineated to the participants and to us. Does anyone have any questions about this before I move on? Okay, discussion questions again. And feel free to add input or ask questions that are unrelated to the discussion questions on the slide. I just put these up here to get the conversation going. So what have been your experiences with the exemption process? Have you run into any issues that delayed the process? What were those issues, and what can we do to make the exemption process easier for you? And please feel free to vent your frustrations with the exemption process. Yes.
Yeah, for the exempted IRB, if I would like to add or remove somebody, do I need to notify the IRB?
Yes, you will need to submit a modification if you want to add personnel who will be conducting research procedures with human subjects. That is because we need an accurate list in our system of who is on the research. If anyone will be interacting or intervening with participants, will be obtaining informed consent, or will have access to identifiable private information, then they need to be listed on your IRB application.
For the exempted project, I don't need to contact.
For exempt projects, there is a little bit more leeway. For non-exempt projects, there is no leeway. We need to know if anyone is doing any of those procedures, they need to be on your application. With exempt projects, we highly encourage that you submit a modification. But depending on the project, it isn't always necessary. An option is you can reach out to me and you can let me know, I have this exempt project and I'm adding this person to it. And I can make a note of that in the study file, make sure they've completed city training. And that's something we can do for exempt research, but not for non-exempt research. So just reach out to me if you want to add someone to your exempt study.
No, like the secondary data analysis.
Oh, yeah, not for secondary data analysis. Like I said earlier, if everything is de-identified, if there's no way to identify participants, we don't need to know who has access to the secondary data unless you tell participants that it won't be shared outside the research team. Any other questions or comments? I know that at least one of you is frustrated with the exemption process. I don't know who, but I would love to hear from you.
I just
Yes.
have a question, this is just hearsay, because I haven't submitted, but this is just kind of from what I'm hearing. So my understanding, and I saw the link, I looked on your website, and there's a link to the exempt status and the federal guidelines and what exempt status should include. And my understanding is that sometimes faculty members might reach out to the IRB kind of informally to request some input on whether it does or does not meet exempt status. Is that the way that you would prefer procedure to occur?
So, we do get a lot of emails saying, hey, I'm doing this, can my study be exempt? Per our policy and our standard operating procedure, we implement requirements that are a little bit above what the federal regulations require for exemption, and that requires that the exempt applications undergo a review process. So in order to get an exempt determination, you still need to submit through our system. However, I will say there is a determination that a lot of people confuse with exempt that's actually really different called non-human subjects research. And so non-human subjects research is not the same thing as exempt. Non-human subjects research means that your project either doesn't meet the federal definition of research or doesn't include human subjects as defined in the federal regulations. This might include analysis of de-identified data. That would be non-human subjects research. Those determinations we can provide over email, because that determination is just us saying we don't have the authority to review this. Yes.
Are we talking at all about research with student work samples or anything about classroom-based design? I can't remember, and I'm just in the beginning of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. If we wanted to analyze and do some research with maybe some students' work.
So like classwork that the students are doing. So I don't say anything about that in this presentation, but we are hopefully soon getting our FERPA SOP signed into effect. And once that SOP is signed into effect, I'm going to create and issue some guidance on how to do research with student data that is subject to FERPA, because there are additional considerations when data are subject to FERPA. For instance, you'll need to get written consent for the release of their FERPA data and things like that. But currently, since the SOP is still being developed, and I'm hoping that it's going to be signed into effect soon. I can't provide specific guidance on that right now. However, if you want to like reach out to us about your project, we can work with you on that. Sorry, I couldn't provide a better answer. I was hoping at least one person would yell at me about the exemption process. Come on. It doesn't sound like it from the research you were describing.
Somebody had a really big problem, they're probably not here. That's how that works.
Man, I was hoping this discussion would be more contentious. But what can you do? Okay, any more questions or comments before I move on? If you think of anything that you hate about the exemption process later, feel free to jump in the middle of another slide. I'm happy to hear it because we do always want to learn how to improve our processes and what our processes feel like on your end. So, student research. As many of you may be aware, we now require that faculty serve as the PI for student-led research projects. We no longer permit students to serve as the PI, and this is for a few reasons, but the main reason is due to the functionality of CAIUs. So for those of you who've been long enough to have who have been here long enough to have used our previous system, IRBIS, you know that IRBIS would require faculty advisor certification before we would receive it. In Cayuse, there's no way to require certification from anyone other than the PI. And this has caused an issue when we transitioned to Cayuse as our submission system, because we had students submit research and go through the review process without their faculty advisor's input or awareness because it didn't require certification from the faculty advisor. And we don't want that to happen because ultimately the faculty advisor is responsible for the student's research. So the faculty now, in order to always ensure that the faculty have to sign off on the application, the faculty need to serve as the PI. Additionally, this also makes it, since the faculty advisor was always responsible for the research, but having the faculty serve as the PI makes that a little bit more clear to the faculty that, hey, if your student does something wrong with the research, if this research is handled inappropriately, if there's non-compliance with the research, you are on the hook for this. And so those are the two main reasons that we wanted to do that. When we made that change, we issued the faculty advisor guidance webpage, which goes over, I'll pull that up. It goes over, like you'll see, it's pretty long and detailed. We have right here, we have our general submission and review timeline. And it goes through each steps. And then we have areas where students require the most assistance. And we describe how you can assist your students in these areas. And so we want to provide as much resources to the faculty that are supporting students' projects as possible, especially for faculty that are supporting, say, an undergraduate student who's doing an honors thesis when the faculty has never conducted human subjects research. And so if you're ever mentoring a student research project, I highly encourage you to check out the faculty advisor guidance page. And I encourage you to send your student to the Student Corner webpage. We've recently updated this webpage, which is full of different FAQs to be up to date with our current process. And we have somewhere in here, we have documents. That's not the document I thought it was. We have documents that like print out printable documents. That's the document. It's not the document. I think we need to update the link. We have printable documents somewhere on here that the students can print out that will, there we go. They can print this out and it's a little checklist. And so they can, as they're preparing, that they say, okay, I've completed city training. Okay, I've looked at the IRB website and the consent templates. I've designed my recruitment materials. I designed my data collection instruments. I scheduled a pre-submission consultation if I want one. And this walks them through the whole process in a simple way. And this slide answers some frequently asked questions that we get about student research. So it's a good resource for students. Okay. And then finally, principal investigator responsibilities. So as the PI, you are ultimately responsible for the conduct of the research. Once approval or exemption is received, the study must be conducted within the scope of the approved or exempt IRB protocol. If you wish to change anything about your application, you will need to submit a modification and you will need to wait for that modification to be approved or exempted before you can proceed with implementing the revised procedures. Additionally, it is ultimately your responsibility to conduct your research in compliance with ethical guidelines and relevant laws and regulations, university policies and procedures, and site requirements. We review your research to a certain specific set of regulations and policies, but the research you're conducting may be subject to additional regulations and policies that we don't consider in our review. For instance, if you're conducting research say in an elementary school, then you will possibly require district permission to conduct research in their district. That is not something that we review or regulate, and it is your responsibility to know the additional laws, policies, regulations, and rules that apply to your research that are not included in IRB review. Okay. That's everything I have. Do we have, I'm hoping that there are some more questions, comments, thoughts, things that we can discuss. I'm happy to address anything you want to ask about, even if it's like really specific and just has to do with your research project. I'm happy to answer that now. Yes.
So, I've talked to a few other researchers, just trying to figure out what I should implement. But something, to the effect of, not that I'm expecting this, but I'm sure it will be asked, is, emergency protocol. So I have like a list of things that I would want to do, or if I notice something, monitoring physiological signs. But then, God forbid, never want it to happen. Should I call 911 or something like that? And I've noticed a few researchers do different things. I was wondering if the IRB has something that they are specifically, I know you guys are looking for something as you should, but is there a specific verbiage? Or is it kind of like call 911, meet the emergency responder at the front of Leon Levine and have a researcher staff take them back to your lab, or is it something more specific than that?
Andy, do you want to give some input?
I guess I can give you an example. So if we're conducting a study down in the neuromuscular lab and there's an event, we have an AED device there, and we would specify, we would have people that are CPR trained. The AED is, approximately 50 feet from it. If it's something that's, and we would call 911, and we would have somebody out, and you need to know that in this building, it's the entrance at the end of the hall, this hallway that empties out not on the Deerfield side, or it's that side. I don't even know what we call the science department over there, but that's where EMS comes into this building. So you need to just specify this is the one,
Like
somebody
a
would,
protocol.
yeah, somebody would stay with the
Okay.
person, and this is what we would do. And it can be just a step-by-step kind of thing.
Yeah, and we don't have a one size fits all like emergency protocol. It'll be up to you and your lab to decide what you want to do in case of emergency, and then provide that plan to us.
Not that I know that will be asked. And
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I don't want to get kicked back for not including it.
No, that was a good question. Thank you.
I think there's language in the informed consent template that says if there's an injury
Right.
and you go to the emergency room, that you can let the emergency staff know that you're in the study, and that you are responsible for the costs. That's in the template.
Yes.
So I take a lot of blood from my studies. Sometimes I get expedited review. Sometimes it goes to full board. Is it because of the amount of blood that and the amount's always the same, but the number of draws, or what's the cutoff?
Yes, I've got an answer for you, and this actually has nothing to do with risk. It has to do with the regulations. So in order for a study to receive expedited review, it needs to fit in one of 8 expedited categories that are set by the federal government. One of those categories is related to blood draws. Under that category, it can only be expedited if the blood draws occur not more than 2 times in a 1-week period. So it's really weird, but that's why, yeah. So that's why even if the study is minimal risk, if you're conducting 3 blood draws in a week, we cannot, per the federal government, review it under expedited procedures. Yeah, it's a little ridiculous, but
You want to look at that, if you just did IRB blood draw requirements, it'll take you to the federal regulations, and that's exactly what we have to follow. That's ear sticks, heel sticks on a baby, it doesn't matter. It's the feds that set that.
Yeah.
Alright.
if you do 3 finger pricks in a week, it has to go to the full board. I know, it's kind of crazy, but it's what the regulations say.
That total for your price or, like, per subject?
Oh, per subject, thank you. If you are drawing blood more than 2 times in a week per subject.
Is for the lactate test where we stick them once and we complete bleed, as long as we don't have to stick them again.
So what we do in Language 49, that's outside of it, but if you had somebody coming in and do the lactic test, and it was part of a research procedure, then yeah, that would have to go full, because that's more than 2 sticks.
What if we're saying we're sticking it once, we're allowing them to continue to.
So if we did it, so if you had an indwelling catheter, that would still.
I mean, I think exactly like in 249, right? We see it all the time where the student stick the ear and it just continues to bleed the entire test. We don't have to stick them in.
But you can't guarantee that's gonna happen. And so if I were the reviewer, I'd like, no, that's not the real world. If you put a catheter in, then that would be a different conversation. But then we would have to have that. That's
more
more
nice.
I mean, you know, we've got good leaders and bad leaders.
Right.
Even this exchange, I think, when you go to review, the question was, what happened with in review? It's like one person might see it one way, and then we get stuck in this sometimes, like, what's it gonna be? And this is why we have to have, sometimes call an expert reviewer who's gonna have yet another opinion on it. And always reviewer 3. Everybody, always reviewer 3. That's gonna sink it, so it can jam things up. Right. I would also add that don't leave it to the IRB reviews imagination. Don't leave it to their imagination, fill in the blanks for you. If you think something needs a little bit more detail, provide a little bit more detail.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? If no one, sorry, you're just scratching. If no one has any, then I guess we can call it early. Thank you all for your participation and for attending. I appreciate like all of your thoughts, comments, questions, and I greatly appreciate all of your time. Thank you for attending. Hopefully, Gary, can I get you to send out the slides?
And I've recorded this and I'll put it on our faculty resources as well. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.
Now will be no more complaints ever. Not IRB. Hear that?
I wish the people that had complaints
Yeah.
came here. I was hoping for people to yell at me.
Hours are you?